First of all, I'd like to thank you at a rather belated date for your thoughts on this and gifts and cards at the time of my birthday. I appreciate the kindness of all of you. Now, this is a very interesting and unusual occasion, and actually very little is known about the deeper aspects of the Easter ceremonies. They have been closely associated with the Testaments and have been left as merely sacred times relating to the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. But there is a much older and a much more interesting and involved principle involved. And this is something that I think is seldom if ever mentioned. Actually, as you realize, in the Bible, we are told that after the crucifixion, Jesus descended into the underworld and to release souls in limbo, and also to the harrowing of hell. Now, this thinking has a very wide and deep original distribution among the religious beliefs of the world. Actually, if we go back to the Alexandrian and pre-Alexandrian mystics, we find an interesting thought that has descended from a very old time, namely the problem of birth. According to our general consideration, the 9 months of the prenatal epoch constitute what the ancients called a broken wheel. We find the story of the broken wheel in the Bible, and we also know that it was the peculiar symbol of the martyrdom of Hypatia, or St. Catherine of Alexandria. The broken wheel with 3 spokes missing. Now, this broken wheel was the symbol of the prenatal epoch, in which 9 months of preparation resulted in the approximate appearance of the child in this world. But the ancients said that the cycle represented the 9 steps of preparatory esoteric growth, and the 3 broken spokes were the 3 initiations into the mysteries. Therefore, the human being is born into this world in 9 months and born into the next birth in the 3 months or degrees of initiation. This was a very ancient belief, and it has perhaps some very curious and remarkable implications. A number of the ancient pagan mysteries divided the rites and rituals into 9 degrees or steps. And these constituted the degrees of preparation. And in the actual living life of the individual, the lesser mysteries, or the 9 degrees, represented the probationship, or the preparation of the human being for greater enlightenment. So these 9 steps, or the 9 months of the prenatal epoch, actually relate to our lives here in this world, where by 9 steps we cross the interval between birth and enlightenment. Thus, the entire physical life of the individual becomes a symbol of the celebration of the lesser mysteries, those of preparation, of probationship, and of the gradual mastery of the imperfections which prevent the advancement of consciousness. In other words, the 9 months of the prenatal epoch represent the periods of purification in this life. The individual is given here a prenatal existence. A prenatal existence in the terms that he is alive in this world, but he is limited within a kind of womb of matter. He is held a prisoner of the physical body in which he lives and the physical environment in which he functions. So actually, physical life as we know it was regarded by these ancient peoples as a cycle of preparation for something else. This life in itself is not the end. The fulfillment of the life purpose is not measured in the interval between the cradle and the grave. The individual is not complete merely because he lives through this world, but he is prepared for something better if he understands how to live in this world, and also maintains the integrities which are the tests or initiations of the lesser rites. We are here, therefore, primarily to prepare for something better. There is something beyond, something more noble, something more universally significant to this little struggle to survive in this world. But without this struggle and this survival, we are not ready for anything else. We would mostly like to get over the trials and troubles of life, leave them behind, and go on to bliss. But this is not the way nature operates. Nature tells us that within our own structure there is a alchemical procedure constantly going on, in which we are growing toward our own true birth, which has been referred to as the second birth. This true birth is the individual who has prepared himself to be born into the world of the wise. This is the interval of preparation, and we have been given all the instructions necessary to struggle with the tests, the problems, the examinations that are necessary to prepare us for something superior to our present state. The materialist is left on a difficult position because he has nothing to look forward to. A number of theologies which have lost their esoteric meanings also a little difficult because, according to them, the individual here, if he lives a certain level, goes on to an unknown joy, while if he doesn't succeed, he goes to an eternal damnation. This is not very encouraging to most people. As one man said rather wisely, most of us are too poor of spirit to go to heaven, but a little too good to go to hell. Therefore, we are tied into the wheel of rebirth. Reincarnation and karma become the instruments of probationship for a bigger and more important existence. Thus we find in the ancient rites and stories that we are here to solve problems, to transmute the various elements of nature, of our human natures, until we are prepared to take on the heavier responsibilities of mature existence. This world is the childhood of life for us. And after we finish the childhood, in the 9 months of the symbolic epic, we then prepare for maturity in the 3 degrees of the greater rites. These, the greater rites, are the ones by means of which we release the divine potential within ourselves. Now, the Christian mysteries have a certain very valid point, which we also generally overlook. As Paul said, Christ in you, the hope of glory. Therefore, not only in this world must this Christ in you labor for fulfillment and release, but there has to be some relationship between the internal Christ in you and the afterlife. In other words, we take this Christ in us with us when we go, because finally its importance to us lies in the fact that it is part of our own spiritual integrity. It is the very soul of us that goes with us out of this world into that which lies beyond. If we take this soul with us in a state of decrepitude, if the individual has had a poor life, unreasonable, not necessarily poor in the sense of simplicity, but poor in the sense of virtues, the individual takes into the afterlife the very spiritual power with which he was created. It is still there, and he has gone with it into another dimension of existence. But in this dimension of existence, the Christ in him must still abide. Therefore, in limbo, the fact of the eternal value of the Savior is clearly indicated. In limbo are supposed to rest the souls of all who died in virtue prior to the advent of Christ. Therefore, they could not be converted to Christianity because the religion or the faith had not arisen. On the other hand, like Moses and Aaron and many of the patriarchs of the Old Testament, they were persons of virtue. They could not be disregarded. Also, the millions of human beings who lived nobly and kindly according to the beliefs they had could not perish simply because they had not gone through a Christian baptism. So limbo was for those who were not evil, could not be punished, should not be punished, but were not in part of the ordained and baptized Christian faith. This is one of the points of Christ in limbo. In other words, he went to liberate or redeem or baptize by a spiritual mystery all of the virtuous who had lived before his advent, so that they then became part of the orders of the blessed. This concept was almost necessary, but because of the combination of the Old and New Testaments. But it was still more a moral necessity, because in the past there were very great and noble people. There were also noble people who belonged to other races and other faiths, because there were no faiths as we know them today involving Christianity prior to the Christian era. But all these noble people, the virtuous people who kept the rules, whether in China or India or Persia, Greece, Egypt or Rome, if they were virtuous as individuals, if they lived a good life, if they were honest in their dealings, and if they had a sense of the reality of a spiritual truth behind mortality, these souls were redeemed by the harrowing of Hades. It was a mysterious factor or dimension in early Christianity. Now, the crucifixion of Christ, as was shown in the writings of Bamy and many other Christian mystics, it was a heart mystery. And in the very early diagrams of the early psychics of Christianity, there are many in which a human heart is depicted with the crucifixion occurring within it. There are also diagrams of the human heart with the entire concept of the Trinity, of the three persons of the Godhead within the human heart. So that in mysticism, as far as it is understood, the heart mystery tells us all that the great cycle of Christianity is an internal experience. It is a mystery within us. It is something that is occurring constantly within the mystery of the soul itself. And this soul that we take with us when we go carries within it the divinity with which we are originally endowed. Therefore, when we leave this world at the end of our physical existence, we take with us within ourselves the instrument of our redemption. In other words, the Christ in you remains that even after death, and goes with us into the other world. Under those conditions, it is said that it descends into the realms of the dead. The realms of the dead being those who have left the body but still have the soul. And all of the great mysteries of life go with us when we go. They do not stay here. Those things which belong to Caesar remain here, but those things which belong to God go with us when we go. And no individual goes empty-handed. No individual goes without hope or without any of the endowments of possibility with which we associate religion. So we have now a certain understanding of the death of Christ in this sense, that the Christ in us is crucified. The Christ in us descends into the realms of the dead. The Christ in us is resurrected through the restoration of our own consciousness. Now, in the problem of this kind, we have to consider what most pre-Christian religions accepted, and many of the post-Christian have also accepted, and that is the doctrine of reincarnation. Reincarnation means that we go into the invisible world, not to perish, not to go to eternal solution or punishment, not to be weighed in the balance and found wanting, but rather as part of a larger cycle of existence. And in the post-mortal state, we carry with us all of our spiritual allotment, all of the essential nature of our own internal integrities. The interesting figure, I think, of this appears in Buddhism, where we have Jizo, the benevolent teacher. Jizo, the bodhisattva of the little children. The name is almost similar to our own idea of Jesus. How the idea originated, we are not sure. It probably came from India. But we know that in the worlds of shadows, where the darkness causes the little souls to be lonesome and to wonder what happens next, these little infants in the world of darkness represent simply human souls after death. While they're there, not knowing what to do, bewildered and lonely, they hear the tinkling of the alarm staff of the guardian of little children. And Jizo appears among them as a parent, takes them in his arms, he holds them close, tenderly nurses their needs, and wherever he puts a footstep, according to the ancient belief, a lotus blossom rises in the afterlife. This is, of course, a very sentimental type of thing, but perhaps it is a little more true than we realize, because when we depart from here, we take also our hopes, our fears, our anxieties, and the seeds of our faith. Now, the seeds of faith probably are a little stronger after death than they are in this world, because the first thing that happens when the individual passes out of this life is the actual experience of survival. He has always hoped it would be a good thing. He always hoped that some part of him would go on and live. He always hoped that there was some reward for his efforts, some opportunities for further growth, and certainly that he would abide in the love of God. This hopefulness which we have here is suddenly formed into a reality. The individual awaking from death finds that he is still alive. And this fact in itself proves immortality. It proves something that the physical world cannot bestow in its fullness. It proves that the materialist is wrong, because among those who wake up after death will be the materialist himself. He may be a little drowsy for a while because he hardly believes. The materialist may feel that he is suffering from a delusion that he is surviving. But if he is suffering from the delusion, there must be a he who is suffering, and the fact remains that he has survived. So this survival is the beginning of a new experience, a new dimension of purpose. This survival also brings gradually to consciousness the idea of growth, the idea of going on, the recognition of mistakes, the realization that mistakes must be paid for, that there is a certain retribution necessary, but that this retribution is never a retribution of terror. It is never ugly. It is never cruel, because it is constantly guarded and guided by the indwelling divinity within ourselves. The Christ in us must express to us the need for our own repentance or our own reorganization of life, but it is never a destructive thing. The internal life of the individual cannot die, but must go on, guided by the indwelling divinity of salvation. So this particular problem goes on a little further until, by degrees, the entity that is out of embodiment begins to realize that this experience is only part of a great educational theory. It is part of a growth process. It has all kinds of realities and truths in it that we do not generally understand. We find, therefore, that we awake from the sleep of mortality in the afterlife. But strangely enough, we awake from the wakefulness of the afterlife by the sleep of rebirth. Gradually, we go through an inner experience, and then objectively that experience again fades away. But in each case there is something residual there. The individual becomes more and more aware of his own continuity, becomes more and more aware of an infinite purpose that is worthy of our acceptance and our understanding. If we even for a moment experience the integrity of existence, if we know that the things that are happening are right, if we know that we're going somewhere and doing something that is meaningful, all of life here in this shadowed existence becomes more significant. It becomes obvious that the grave is not the end, and that the labors we performed here do not go down to dust with the body. So having this realization, we begin to reintegrate our lives here. We begin to prepare ourselves for the fulfillment of the 9 months of the prenatal epoch, which are the periods of purification and regeneration. We find ourselves gradually rising from a primitive state through all the evils and through all the uncertainties of primitive existence. We also find ourselves, as we are today, in a world of competition, in a world of war, selfishness. We find in ourselves immense pressures which are not good. We realize that we haven't the integrities to live the principles we believe. We are led away into various byways in which our moral conduct is not what it should be. It was for this reason that Plato took the ground. The punishment and the after-death purgatory recognized in some religions, that this is actually a compensation here in this world. This world is the world and sphere of retributions. This world is where we suffer for our mistakes and keep on making them. This is the world in which the so-called damnation of the soul is achieved. Not that it cannot be, that it can be damned, it cannot be. But here is punishment, and punishment for ignorance, punishment for superstition, punishment for fear. Here we are faced constantly with problems, and until these problems are solved, we cannot cleanse the life. And until the life is cleansed, we cannot pass to a higher state of consciousness or greater achievement. We note that in almost all of the ancient religions, water was important. Water was purification. Water was the washing away of those pressures and forces which limit our growth and spiritual unfoldment. So we can take a simple little example, as we find it every day, the person wandering along with a half-pleasant disposition, but also tensions, pressures, unpleasantness, conspiracies, fears, remorses, all these emotions every day, so that truly we are creatures of little faith. We accept all of the problems with the full force of emotional stress, and a great many individuals become hopelessly neurotic before they get out of here at the end of a lifetime. They simply are unable to experience the right form of existence. For these persons, antiquity established the great institutions of religion. It gave also philosophy as a means of remedying the mistakes of life. But neither religion nor philosophy can be effective if the individual rejects them. If he refuses to accept the importance of correcting his own mistakes, he will keep right on making them. If he refuses to believe that he is rewarded for right by the solution of problems, if he does not believe this, he does not benefit from it. Therefore, all of this is a probationship, and this probationship constitutes the 9 months of the so-called prenatal epoch of the entity in this world. the 9 months in the material sphere, in which he is being prepared for the mystery of birth. And this preparation is under a constant guidance, a constant direction. There is a mysterious umbilical which connects the unborn human soul to God. And it is this which was called in the Bible the silver cord. Actually, we are guarded until the time for birth comes. But when that time comes, then we must stand on our own feet, take our own breath, and begin an independent and individual life. And at that moment, the whole responsibility of growth and progress descends upon us. The individual is responsible for the life he lives. He is responsible for the use he makes of natural resources, not only in his own life, but in the world around him. He is responsible for the wars and crimes which he causes. He is responsible for his deviations from the proper conduct for which he was intended. He cannot say he does not know what virtue is, because he does. He has had ample opportunity, under the guidance and wisdom of the ancient ones, to prepare himself for a useful life. If he rejects this, denies it, or is in conflict with internal selfishness and pressure, then the problems go on unsolved. But in this case, there still is the same situation. The individual who passes out of this life with a great deal of unfinished business in his karma, in his relationship with the infinite pattern of things, still has the divine power within his own heart. Christ goes with him because it is the principle within himself, the Christ in him. And this is the key, the germ of salvation, which is called in the Orient the Buddha seeds. The seed of inevitable perfection is in the heart of every living thing. The bodies may die, the heart may stop to beat, but the seed never ceases. It goes on, and it is like the parable of the mustard seed, which is the least among seeds, but grows into a vast tree. All these things are part of the old wisdom doctrines. Now in Egypt we have the story, for instance, of the nature of the afterlife, which is quite different from that we have in the Christian faith. But it is worth thinking about, because some way there has to be in our own hearts and minds something to take the place of purgatory, and something that must be a remedy for eternal damnation. These are not possibilities in the universe. Therefore, there has to be other explanations. Many ancient peoples were groping for these explanations, depending upon internal intuition and insight for a solution suitable to the need of the occasion. So in Egypt we have an interesting idea that after the death of Osiris, who died assassinated by his own brother, the establishment of the great hall of judgment in Amenta, the great wonderful temple where the Osiris in the afterlife governed the quick and the dead. And Osiris therefore became, like Hades, a king of the underworld. But there was nothing about Osiris that was evil, nor was there anything about Hades that was evil. Hades was represented by the Greeks as a rather gloomy deity who did the best he could with a situation that got more complicated every day. And we might assume if Hades was somewhere around today, he would be more gloomy than ever, because of the quality of what was descending into his domain. It would not be very attractive or inspiring. But anyway, Osiris ruled over a beautiful world, a world of growth and happiness, an underworld that was really an over-life. Here he ruled with all of his court of deities, with Isis as his sister wife, and all of the good spirits and the great jury that was to judge the quick and the dead. And the one and only son of Osiris, the young Prince Horus, who was begotten of the father, begotten after the death of the father, therefore was the widow's son. This power was the custodian of mercy. Anything that Horus asked of his Father would be granted, because he was the only begotten and the beloved of the Father. So when souls in sorrow and misery came into the great hall of judgment to pass the tests as to whether they could go on to a blissful existence, the jury watched and decided. Thoth read the tablets. Anubis brought in the soul of the deceased, and they stood in the presence of Osiris. And it was there that the deceased named his virtues, pointed out the good things he had done, and tried to prove that he was worthy to go in to eternal happiness. If it happened, as more often it would happen, that there were some doubts as to his worthiness, whether it was really true that he had never failed in charity, that he had never deceived anyone, that he had never profited at the loss of others, that he had never been cruel, that he had never neglected his children, that he had always thought of others first and not of himself. The great confession of faith has been said to be so positive, so comprehensive, that not one person in 100 million could actually honestly claim it. It was the highest moral code for the dead that probably the world has ever known. But in this emergency, everything hung for a moment in suspension. The soul was not really worthy to go on. And the soul, speaking through the little urn in which the heart was hidden, said, "Do not let me die with the body that lives and dies for only a day." And in this emergency, Horus comes forward. He is the one who asks his Father to forgive the sin and to place the sin upon himself instead, that he would take the sin of the person and let the sin be neutralized so that the soul could go on to growth and peace. And unless there was great emergency and some terrible matter involved, the Father always permitted the Son to redeem the soul so that the soul could go on into the better life. Now, there's something about that has a definite Christian echo to it, even though it was in force in Egypt 2,000 years before the birth of Christ. There is this intercession in which the soul intercedes for the salvation of the being. Then, if it is worthy and it is allowed to go on, and in the psychostasia, or the weighing of the soul, it is justified and protected by Horus, it is then led into the land beyond. And this land is not a strange wilderness, nor is it a place in which there is nothing but worldly palaces. It is another Egypt. It is another earth, but a gentle earth, in which the virtuous rest and carry on the common deeds of living. The Egyptians had no idea of an afterlife that was either punishment or laziness. The soul did not simply float around on flowery beds of ease. The soul in the afterlife kept right on doing the things that had made it happy and useful in the physical world. It kept on learning, in a sense. It kept on growing, and it kept on becoming more and more aware of its own divinity. And then came finally the exhaustion of this particular karmic cycle, and the soul returned to embodiment. But it brought back with it an internal security that it had not known before. It did not know the name of that security. It was not something that it could put its finger on as a reality. But the soul within became stronger. The determination to grow became deeper. And the ability to handle the common problems of life became greater. With each embodiment, the soul advanced a step in its growth by purification, by the mysteries of water, the mysteries of the cleansing power of the pure stream of the water of life, the water of everlastingness, and those who drank thereof never thirsted again. So here we have a concept that was to influence the early rise of the Christian faith. It was a rising up of the belief that the soul itself contained within it the eternal power of its salvation, that the spirit of the being was God, the soul of the being was Christ, and the body of the being was the ecclesia, or the assembly of the redeemed, the church, the building. The purified body was a church. The purified mind was a great university. The purified heart was the perfect religion. All of these internal values were being gradually matured within us. And at a certain point, the power to consciously lead or direct this power that would help us to grow, would become individual, and we would have the right of self-determinism. The time would come when instead of growing under nature's laws, we would grow under self-dedication. And when the individual chose to be right, this was determinism, and immediately rewards, punishments, hesitations, and advancements began to arise within the character of the person. When he had the power to make the decision, he had the responsibility of the decisions that he made. This is pointed out rather clearly in some of the early writings of St. Thomas Aquinas, who was evidently aware of this particular concept in religion. So the person, having passed through the various degrees, sustained by an inner life which he could not fully understand, gradually received the moral instruction which would bring him into discipleship or into an immediate association with the internal part of his own life. Well, while we are in our normal state of affairs, what are the great hindrances? Well, the great hindrance to our growth is ourselves. The great hindrance is our own ego, our own personality, and our own appetites and desires. It is really the materiality in ourselves which is the evil spirit. It is pride, it is ambition, it is avarice. All these are the emotions of the unredeemed, and these become the basis of responsibility after we have become aware of the values and realities of these matters. The individual who, knowing that he is drinking too much, continues to do so, becomes an alcoholic. He is an alcoholic by choice, not by necessity. He has chosen something of a weakness within himself. He has avoided the strength of character necessary to control and direct his life, and gradually becomes a victim of his own weakness. Therefore, this is a condition in which a karmic situation is set up, because he knew better and didn't do. If he didn't know better, then there was another type of life relating to him. Then there was another kind of dimension in which his growth would take place. But when he knew, or when he believed and he did not do, then he was in trouble, because he not only destroyed his own integrities, but went against the principle within himself. He is the one who became the traitor, the individual who, knowing, realizing, and understanding the power of good within himself, does not live according to it, is a betrayer of that good, and is the source of the suffering and misery of the divine being within. This the ancients held as a moral value, a reality. Of course, we put it into words, it's oversimplified, there's no question about that. But on the other hand, while it doesn't necessarily sound as though it solved everything, it helps to give us a new angle or a new point with which to consider matters. After we go a certain length of time and so forth, we discover that we need instruction. And instruction is an important thing. But where are we going to get it? Well, we know somebody who we think knows more than we do, so we go and become a student. We try to gain the skill of a violinist or the wisdom of a philologist, and we feel that we can go to some wise person here and be instructed. In India, the individual desiring spiritual refreshment goes to a guru, becomes a disciple, and may stay with the teacher for the rest of his life. He stays with the teacher and is happy because as he watches the teacher is doing what is right. The teacher is living what he claims, and this gives the confidence to the disciple to remain with him. Now, in this type of situation, we also have to find out what can we do about those things which teachers apparently cannot communicate to us. They can tell us what we ought to think, but that doesn't make us think that way. We get very noble instructions, but we're not really immediately changed by it. Something is weak in ourselves. And we also go to various sources for instruction and usually get a lot of conflicting reports. We go to 10 different people and we get 10 different stories. We join 10 different faiths and follow 10 different doctrines and still have not the courage to live the kind of life we ought to live. We also sometimes assume that we don't have to, that if we select the right religion, that the religion will cure us, that by joining we accomplish all. This is like the paint slogan, save the surface and you save everything. But actually it doesn't work that way. No matter how noble the institution may be, it cannot do much for us unless the individual begins to grow within himself, rather than simply depending upon instruction bestowed upon him. Now, instruction is valuable up to a certain point, but then we have to realize that we must find our own core. We must discover the reality within ourselves. And this reality within ourselves is something that we have to finally experience through dedication. And this means that the statement in the Bible, "Be still and know that I am God," is a virtual truth. It is a very important statement. And then we come face to face with a few words that we don't know what to do with. Be still. Now, how to be still without being lazy is a question. How to be still and stay awake is a question. Because in our consciousness of things, stillness is inertia. And inertia is wrong. We should be out rolling up our sleeves and doing great heroic deeds. But the scriptures tell us, and Lao Tzu told us, Buddha told us, and Confucius told us, Zoroaster told us, Moses told us, and Jesus told us, that the actual problem is the accomplishment of quietude, a complete silence, a strange quietness, a dying out of the fires by means of which life is distorted. The individual has to be able to be receptive, not to the instruction outside of himself, but to the instruction that is descending from within the deepest part of himself. The great teaching comes through the individual, not to him, because the great teaching in every case must be according to the need of the student. The teaching must be that which is next for the person and not a vast sectarian denomination. It must be that the teaching solves the daily living problems of growth. So how do we do that? Well, we have to smooth out some way the inconsistencies and fallacies by which most of us live. We must get rid of all of the intensities and tensions which lock us into a world of petty incidents and constant frustrations. We must get over neurosis, which is an escape of the individual who can no longer live with his own ignorance. He gets sicker and sicker, and finally perhaps has to have professional assistance. But these things are all of the body, and somewhere back of that body, as is represented in the mystery of the heart doctrine, is the heart itself, within which seated eternally is the Holy Trinity. And that this is this internal power, which is in everything, every grain of sand carries within it the secret locked power of its own evolvements.